we're back on the 55 this week. I'm going to start working on our remote brake reservoir system that we've talked about before on here. So you remember we have our master cylinder mounted here in the floor. Made these two fittings here that go into the top of the master cylinder, and then we have these fittings that come off of it. So what we're going to have is a remote reservoir mounted probably somewhere right here on this tube, where we can add brake fluid into it and keep brake fluid on this. But since our plan is to take and cover this with a panel here, so we've got a footrest and a place to rest our feet so that we can work all the pedals, we don't need to get to this reservoir every time to fill it with fluid. We can do it remotely with this reservoir mounted right over here. So you can see those fittings are already there. I have some 90-degree -3 AN fittings that are going to some -3 stainless hose here, this air-equipped stuff. We're going to route those over to a route right there, over to here, and then to our remote reservoir. So my buddy Chris over at Waff Racing sent us over a pretty nice little piece to mount our reservoir here. So this is a 3D printed piece with some metal inserts into it. This will clamps to our reservoir. I told him what diameter I needed. It's going to clamp to this reservoir, and then the other nice thing is on the back side here, it has those same metal threaded fittings inside of it. So what we can do is we can basically have a piece that comes off of that tube, have some holes through it, a tab that comes off that tube, 2 holes through it, and this will bolt directly to that tab, and it's going to get us mounted up like we want it to. So it should be safe, secure, sturdy once we weld this piece to it. And that clamp on that is really strong. That reservoir is going to stay right in place. So that's what we're doing, is getting a tab made now so that we can mount up this remote reservoir. What I have here is a piece of chromoly. I already have it marked out, those 2 holes that need to be drilled through so that we can bolt the reservoir to it. This piece is way bigger than we need it to be right now, but I'm going to mount the reservoir up to it with our clamp first, and then trim down what we don't need and get it positioned and all of that good stuff. So that's what I'm working on. I've got these holes center punched here. I'm gonna go take them in here and get them drilled out, and then we can mount up a reservoir. So these screws that are in that reservoir are 3/16 of an inch. I'm gonna drill this with a number 11 so that we've got a little bit of clearance on it. Now the question is, how close did I get those holes? Not too bad. Now to show you guys what we have in mind, we want this reservoir to kind of set somewhere about right there. So that's going to give us clearance on the door when the door shuts. It'll give us easy access to it if we need to put some more brake fluid in it. And it's also just kind of out of the way in general. It's not going to get hit. To get in, we have to crawl over this bar right here. So we're not going to, you know, chance hitting it or anything. And then it lets me run these lines down this tube and up through here, and they should be pretty neat. So now that's basically what that's going to look like. What I'll do, I'm going to trim this piece off, and I'm going to trim this hole out of it right there, and that'll get us back to the piece that we need. And with this being that chromoly, it's super rigid, super stiff, so we don't have to worry about it flexing and bending or anything. And we're going to keep this tucked against just clearance the roll bar itself, and that should give us plenty to get a weld in here, here, and then potentially here on the back side also. So that's the plan, and that's kind of what we're thinking. I just wanted to show it to you before I started trimming all this. Okay, so we made just a minor change where we moved this up a little bit higher because we want to make sure that there's plenty of height on this so that it's well above the calipers so that we can gravity bleed this brake system. So we moved it up. I had it sitting about here, had it here. That cap actually sits above this rear bar now, so we can still get to it kind of coming around from this way. Coming around from this way, we can still get to it. And I mean, in theory, we won't have to change that very often or put much in it. So, but anyway, so we got the tab here. We've got it leveled up. I know it doesn't look level, but it is because this bar runs like this. So we've got it leveled, and our reservoir will clamp on there. Dad's getting the welder out. We'll get this welded on. I'll mount the reservoir, and then I can start finishing up making my lines here. All right, Dad has our tab mounted up here. You can see we've got our reservoir mounted up. I've got our lines rotated in a way that they should just come straight down against this bar, and then we can route them over into our master cylinder. But that little clamp from Waff Racing really did the trick. has this thing mounted up really nice. And we can get right in here. You can see that guy is there. I can reach in here and take the lid off. And we'll be ready to fill that up when the time comes. I mentioned earlier why we moved this up was part of the reason was to make sure it was above the calipers so that we could gravity bleed. But the reason behind that is if you don't have that, you have to run residual valves, which hold just a little bit of brake pressure on the calipers, and we don't want that. So we want to try and keep this thing as free as possible. We put a lot of work into getting this thing to roll straight, free, and true. And the last thing we want to do is right immediately start running residual valves in there and get a little bit of brake pressure. So doing it this way allows us to make sure we don't have to run those. We can gravity bleed the system and everything will work just like it's supposed to with no drag. We are going to build our AN lines here that go off of the master cylinder up to the remote reservoir that we just got mounted. So like I said, this is a -3 AN fitting, and comes in multiple parts. So this is a 90, that's the side that's going to come off of the master cylinder. You take this off, unscrew this, and there's going to be a brass fitting in here, just like that. And then, so make sure you don't lose that. That's important. And then you'll see that this has a fitting that will eventually go down in our hose here. So we're going to make sure that we got this side of the fitting onto the hose just like that. Luckily we're okay because that side down there is open, but in the next one that we make, this is going to be way more important. So make sure that that's on with the threaded side up, because that's going to basically mate up into those threads just like that. So you can see here I have flared out the stainless just enough to get enough exposure on the Teflon there that I can then take our brass fitting and we're going to put that onto the Teflon. You can see that that's going to basically live like that right there. I'm just going to take and use the vise here and just put a little pressure on it, make sure it's seated on that Teflon good, make sure it's square to the best of our ability, and that's going to be just like that right there. Now I'm going to go ahead and feed this into the brass fitting. That's going to go into the Teflon. Make sure that your threads and the brass are touching, so you can see that that is mated all the way down where it needs to be. Now one thing I'm going to do, this is way more important on big lines, not as important as on stuff like this, on the ones that are this small. But I'm going to take 1 dot of just like machinist oil here. Yeah, 1 big dot apparently. Put those on the threads so that they stay lubricated while we tighten this up. Put the fitting into the edge of the vise like that. Lightly clamp on it. Now we've got our fitting clamped in the vise. We're going to push the shoulder up on here till it engages the threads. Start tightening those threads. I'm going to take a 7/16 line wrench and start tightening this. It's going to start twisting your line, so you're going to kind of lay it out like this to keep it out straight. Tighten that, and you'll feel it bottom and stop. Go until it stops. It's tight. Now we have one side of our AN line here. Again, this is -3 stuff. You can feel it super solidly in there, locked in place, and hopefully no leaks. I have one side of this already made here, and it's routed this way, so I'm going to go ahead and take my other one, this guy right here, and get him marked and cut, and then we'll go ahead and make another one of these here for the straight fitting off the reservoir. I think now we're going to kind of continue on with our brake system theme. So we got the last thing you saw us do was we got our remote reservoir mounted, got our hard lines made to go down to the master cylinder. They're just kind of loosely in there right now. They're not hard mounted by any means. But one of the things that I want to start doing now is kind of start working on the brake plumbing, the brake system plumbing. If you remember, a long time ago now, we bought new brakes for this thing. We have 4 piston calipers in the front and rear. Now, that's good because we have the same rotors, calipers, everything all the way around this car. So it makes service easier. But in a drag car, you're going to have the potential for the front brakes to lock because you have such a small contact patch on the front tire versus the big giant contact patch on the back tires. So what we're going to do is, since this master cylinder puts out the same brake pressure for both fittings, or both sides of the master cylinder, and we have the same volume of fluid because of our caliper capacity front and rear, we're going to put a proportioning valve into the front calipers, into the front lines, so that we can reduce brake pressure on the front, and that'll be an adjustment thing that we'll have to work on before we take it to the track to make sure that we get it to where the front and rears basically brake evenly. That way we can use these calipers the way that we have them set up and the way we've got them bought. So we bought a strange proportioning valve. So this is the proportioning valve. We're going to mount it out under the hood with our Hurst roll control line lock solenoid here also. So that was some of the stuff we had to get bought. Another thing that we bought is a strange brake pressure gauge. So that will also get plumbed into this system. So we're going to start with the front. I'll talk you guys through what we're going to do. So what we'll do is we'll come out of the master cylinder here. We'll run it forward, and we're going to run it under the firewall there on that tube. So the brake lines will follow this main frame rail all the way to the front. Come out here, and then the proportioning valve and the roll control line lock will get mounted right here on the frame rail. There'll be a line out of the line lock to this caliper here. Then there will be a line out of the line lock over down that tube there over to the other caliper. We'll make more stainless braided lines that go from the caliper over to this, and then there'll be a fitting over there for that to go to. So that's how the front's going to get run, and we'll stick with that first. But first, what we need to do is get our proportioning valve and our line lock mounted so that we have some targets to run the lines. Now I have this pre-made line here. What I'm going to do is, what I want is these to live pretty close together. This proportioning valve, of course, has an in and an out. I want that in to sit pointed toward the inside of the chassis so that we can run that brake line down that frame rail and be there. So we're going to have that mounted like that, and then we'll have the roll control mounted in front of it. I want those to kind of be as close as we can get them together, because there's going to be headers in here, and we want to make sure we steer clear of all of the headers. But we want that proportioning valve mounted here because there's no reason to have it in there. We can make adjustments as we see fit, and hopefully, because you're not going to make adjustments in the car like you would like in a circle track car or something. So we can have this mounted here and make those adjustments as we need to with that mounted out here. So then we'll have a line coming out of the roll control, out of the line lock from here over to the proportioning valve. And like I said, I want those as tight as I can get them together. So I'll start with this one, and we're going to mount it in there. But what we're going to go for first is, since this fitting here is a different size, we're going to cut that end off. But we can put this in here, take it over to our ECI bender that you guys saw us use on my 86 Chevrolet truck the other day when we were working on the fuel pump. And we're going to get a bend directly out of this fitting, 90 degrees, and then get ready to put another bend in it to get over here to the proportioning valve. So these will basically end up sitting like this, something like that right there, on the chassis itself. You can see it out here in the light a little better, and then have that out. What I would like for those to be mounted in a way that that fitting and this fitting are together, or on the same plane, stuck out off the frame rail, and then roughly that far apart. So that's kind of what I have in mind. Let's see what we can get done here. Alright, I kind of roughed in the length that I wanted on that distance between the roll control and the proportioning valve. Got our length set. This is our ECI tube and bender. It's a pretty nice piece because it lets us get a bend directly out of this nut here, out of our inverted flare nut. Brake line nut, whatever you want to call it. So you have this hex stock here that lays against this standoff. Then you have this brass adapter. It comes with whatever you need. It comes with all these different adapters for the different size lines and fittings that you're working with. We're working with 3/16 line here, so we've got that fitting into that fitting, and then that lays directly right here against this, right where the bending action starts. We have our graduations. I'm going to bend that 90 degrees. I put a little oil on that just to keep everything good. Bend that at 90 degrees like that. I'm going to go just past for spring back. Now, take this side out. going to do the same thing over here. There we go. Lay that just like that. Go 90 degrees again. Now we have a nice U-shaped fitting here that we can use to combine our roll control and our proportionate valve. So you can see there how that's going to end up being is like that. So now we're going to build some brackets to come off of that main frame rail there to mount up the line lock and this proportionate valve together. So we've got back here, we've got our sheet of chrome moly. What's the thickness on this? 16th chrome. 63,000 16th inch chrome moly. This is some really heavy duty stuff. So we're going to cut us out a plate out of this so that we can mount all that up. We are going to, it's way too heavy to run in our shear, as much as we'd love to be able to. It's just too heavy, it'll spring the jaws on the shear. And so we want to, what we're going to do is, again, similarly to the shear, our horizontal or our vertical bandsaw back here, that piece is so big it's going to hit our toolbox, so we can't even use it. But I've got our Milwaukee, all the Milwaukee stuff, but we have this Milwaukee Sawzall, and we bought some special carbide tipped blades specifically for doing stuff like this. So we'll go ahead and get those blades out here, right here, and get this piece cut. Dad's marking us a 3-inch section there. 4-inch section, sorry, 4-inch section. Here are the blades that we picked up. These are a Diablo brand Steel Demon. They're 6 inches long, they're made for thin metal, and they have carbide teeth. So we're hoping, I think this is the first chrome moly we've cut with them, but we're hoping that these are going to do really well with this. These are very expensive, like $10 a piece from Lowe's or Home Depot. And we'll get a battery. Luckily, Dad had the thought to check where we were going to put that the line lock and the proportion valve, because you guys saw we were planning to put it out here on the frame rail. It's similar to what Tim McCamus does. Use the line lock as one brake line out to the left side brake. That was our plan. Luckily, he had the thought to pull the headers out and check those, and I don't have them in here, but the headers run right through there, and they're going to run right into that pocket, and they were going to probably be touching the proportionate valve, to be honest with you. So we had to rethink all of that we were going to do. And what we decided on, which is kind of what we wanted to do initially, but we were, again, Tim McCamus knows what he's doing, so we were trying to kind of follow suit with what he recommended. But what we wanted to do was kind of have that line lock and the proportion valve mounted inside the car. So that's what we're going to do. You know, we're going to get it mounted up. So the plan is to get it mounted up right here onto this bar here. So there'll be a line come out of the master cylinder up this bar here to the line lock, to the proportion valve, out of the proportion valve into the line lock, and then there'll be a line out of the line lock down to here, and it'll go down out to the front brakes. And then we'll have a T out there, and we'll get it mounted up like we normally would with a stainless hose off of here out to the caliper itself. So I wanted to catch you guys up on what we decided to do there, and go ahead and show you over here some of the other stuff that we went ahead and did, and kind of the way we did it and why. Alright, so we have our proportionate valve here, and we have our line lock. We're going to be able to mount this up on this bar, which is going to work out good because Dad wanted a brake pressure gauge to be on the dash there. So what we're going to be able to do is mount this line lock in a way that he'll be able to see this gauge from the driver's seat. We have a 2-inch brass pipe nipple here coming off of the line lock into the gauge. Then we have one line coming out of the proportionate valve into the line lock, and this line here will run down this way and bring out, and that'll go to the front brakes. Well, then we'll just put a plug into this hole on the line lock, and that should be really clean. I think it's going to look really neat. we'll be able to make adjustments to the proportion valve easily from the cab or from inside of the car. So if anything happens with the proportion valve, we can swap it out easily. We can make adjustments. If anything happens to the line lock, we can swap it out easily. And also it's going to kind of simplify our wiring. We can kind of keep it kind of short instead of having to run it from the outside in. It'll all be contained inside there. Dad went ahead and built a couple of brackets to mount this stuff up. Now the next thing we've got to do is get these brackets mounted up to this tube here in front of in this top tube here, and then so we'll need to put the seat in, kind of figure out where the gauge needs to be, and then that's going to set where the line lock's going to be, and then we have this line here that'll kind of set where the proportion valve is going to be. But we have some flexibility in this line. We can unbend this a little. We can do stuff like that if we really need to. But that in general is going to be the setup. I could have used the other flare tool here and maybe gained us about an inch, but we decided that it wasn't kind of worth it to cut this off and move this back just to gain that much, because it's not really going to, we don't think it's going to interfere with anything. So we'll go ahead and use this line here and get it welded up and be ready to go. So the other thing that I've been working on is building these lines here, building the front line. So this is the T fitting that we're gonna, well, this style of T fitting is what we're gonna use. We have one line that runs up there to that bracket, and then this line follows the steering rack mount tube across and over to this tab here. So we'll have an AN line that comes off of that bracket and then over here to the brake calipers. But those are going to need to be locked down. I have some clips that I'm going to use to lock them down in place. But I wanted to go ahead and get them made and roughed in before I did that. So then we'll have one line that comes to that T fitting right there out of the line lock. So that's where that's going to end up going. But all this stuff, hard line, just steel line that we're going to use. I think it looks pretty good, you know, not bragging on myself or anything, but I think so far it looks pretty good. If I can kind of make it all look this good, I'll be happy. Spent some time here building our brake line off of our proportioning valve. It goes down here to the tube, lays against that tube, makes that bend, goes down this tube and back on our rear port on our master cylinder here. So that line's kind of made up that way. This is as tight as I could get this, as close to that fitting as I could get it. And because we have this adapter that goes in the master cylinder, it steps it out. So we're going to have to rethink our floor that we're going to build here, but that's okay. We can make that work. But basically from here, the only other thing we have to do, so we have to run a line out of the line lock, follow this same line down, and then go forward. So I've already got that line started here. We'll go under here and get it connected up into our T-fitting and figure out where we need to make our 90-degree bend to come up right here. And that'll be kind of our first bend that we do there. And just like that, little hand fitting up here, a little bending action there. We've got all these lines running here. These will get staked down a little later on, so they'll lay a little flatter together. But you can see those lines run like that. That runs out to the front T here. That line will, again, that'll get tucked in a lot more to the frame rail. Runs up here to our T. And we already have the other lines made to go over and across. That has the front brakes wrapped up lines made. Again, they're gonna have to put some tabs on them, kind of get them locked down in place a little better. I ran out of brake lines, so Dad went to get some more because I've got to make one that runs from the master cylinder back to the rear axle housing, and then I have to make the ones that go across the axle housing. So that's what we'll work on next. But while he is away, I'm gonna go ahead and put some thread sealer on our fittings that are going to go into our line lock. So each one of these brass fittings, I'm going to put some of this Permatex thread sealer. This stuff's like high temperature, but this is what they had at the Napa store. Thread sealer, high temperature. I'm going to put that on all of these fittings and see if there's any way to get that brake gauge to land like that how we want it. But we'll work on that, and hopefully we can do it and make it look nice. All right, so I'm under the car here now. The plan is we're gonna have a fitting that comes out right here, or back here where the rear end sits, and there'll be an AN line that comes down here to a fitting on the rear end housing, and then lines that go out to each side of the brake calipers. But I've got to get a line from the master cylinder to here, so I'm gonna follow this tube, go down around these, down this tube, down here, through this piece of sheet metal here and into the master cylinder. But I'm gonna drill a hole right here to get through that, and I'm gonna put it into a rubber grommet. So I'm gonna drill a few sizes through that to step up to it. This grommet right here, just drill a slit in it so that we can, or just cut a little slit in it so we can get it through it. But that'll keep it sealed off, keep this kind of protected, won't be running through the metal. But this is a 612 is what the inside diameter of this is. We're going to drill this at 609, but like I said, I've got a couple just smaller ones I'm going to drill up to for that. And so we'll go ahead and do that and get this ready to run through this, because I have already started on the line somewhere. I don't know where I laid it. There it is. I've already started on the line right here to get it run forward. I've actually been doing a little bit of work off camera. I got so focused in, I forgot to video it. So let me catch you up with what we've got done. The last thing I think that you saw here was us building that line to go to the rear brakes. So we went ahead and got that done. It's wrapped up. It runs out of the master cylinder here that way. If we use over here, you can see the bends around the tubing, and then up along that and heads over there. And we've got a fitting back there that I'll show you here in a minute. The other thing that I have already done is I have some nylon clamps that I'm using to hold this stuff in place, and this is one of them. I've got a few different sizes, but that's one of them that we're using, and this will allow us to rivet it, but for the time being I can cleco these in place to make sure I've got everything that I want. And there was already some holes in the tubing up here, so I run some 3/16 rivet clecos in this, so you can see that's laying really nice, held back, held together there how we want it. Then as we come down here, I drilled some new 1/8 holes here in this main tube, and we're going to put some more of these clamps on this. We have our stainless lines that we've changed up a little. We rotated this back this way and then have that flow in like this instead of having that hard elbow right here kind of all in this. So you can see all of this runs together. I've got one there holding these two stainless lines, and I've got two here holding the two stainless lines and the hard line together. That's solidly locked in place. Runs up this length to there, and then I've got one here on the outside that goes up here to the reservoir itself. So this section is basically how it's going to live, best that I can tell. Like I said, we will take these clecos out and replace them with rivets later on down the road once we know everything is where we need it to be. But that's basically where we are, and yeah, that's basically what we're going to keep working on. I'm going to start getting all of this line clamped up with these clamps and potentially start looking at the front one. I'm a little concerned about the exhaust, so I might wait until a little later on to finish up the clamps on this one, but I can at least do the ones on the crossover tube, and that'll have that pretty much wrapped up. And that will have our brakes wrapped up except for the rear end housing, because I am going to go ahead and make those lines up, bolt the calipers up, and make those lines up this week while we're working on the brakes, and go ahead and get that in this video, and we'll pretty much have the whole brake system plumbed and ready to go. The last thing that we're going to do this week is get the rear end housing, all the lines run on it. I went ahead and bolted the calipers up here to the mounts. We have our fitting here that goes into the back of the caliper. Got that on both sides here. The plan is to run a T-fitting like this that has a inverted flare on each side of it. It's probably going to end up living somewhere about right there, I would guess. Then we'll also have this here, this fitting that will go to an AN line with a 90 on it. You guys remember we have that fitting up here that's pointed like this. We'll route the line down at an arch, like that, onto that fitting right there. So that's the plan. So I'm going to go ahead and start making the hard lines. You can see I've already got the 90 out. I'm going to run this down to the axle housing here below where the sway bar mount is, and then we'll run it up through here, up and over to that, and then we'll do the same thing here, down by the sway bar mount, up over here, and into that fitting. That's the plan. Alright, after some hand fitting and working, a couple ruined lines, this is what we ended up with. We got it coming out of a brake caliper, routed around here. I wanted to make sure it didn't get in the way of our cover if we needed to take that off. So it runs back here, dips into this area to the top where we've got our brass T that goes into that open fitting for our AN line. Then it comes down this, just like I told you guys, through this area, up and up to this brake caliper. There'll be a 90-degree on that guy right there, so the line will be kind of up like this, and that will give a curve line up to that upper line that's up on the chassis. That is the brake lines for the rear axle housing. Alright guys, the last thing that I wrapped up for this week, I went ahead and threw the calipers on the front, caliper mounts on our front calipers, and if we get in here, I went ahead and made our fitting here that goes on to the tab. It goes on to our AN fitting here, -3, that mounts into this tab here on the chassis. And luckily we had a piece of stainless line left that was just enough for us to be able to make both sides of this. That's going to go into a 90 right here, and it's going to be like that. So we did travel these out all the way out to max steering, and we did travel them. This is at the very bottom of the travel of the strut here, and then it has the ability to go up as well. We'll fix these to the chassis probably right there, so that is pivoting off of that point and not down here. So that's the plan for those. But I did go ahead and make those, and then we're waiting on some fittings here to finish this up. But I think that's going to be good for this week. So like I say, the 55 videos are a little sparse, and there's a lot of time between them because it takes so long to kind of do this stuff for us. We're learning stuff as we go. We're finding stuff. We're sourcing parts. We're trying to find good parts. We're trying to find the best deal, etc., etc., etc. So like there's a lot of stuff that it takes us quite a bit of time to kind of do this. That's why there's videos in between. But I think next time, we're already scoping it out. Next time we're going to start plumbing up the fuel system, get the fuel pump mounted. The fuel cell's already mounted in the back. How we're going to route it, we've already kind of started to discuss it. That's going to be another pretty involved process. So we get that done, and once that's done, the main parts of the plumbing are done, at least for the car itself. We'll have to do more whenever we get the engine in. But then after that, I can drill out the holes that we haven't drilled for the 10, and then pull all that out and go ahead and start getting the chassis ready to get painted, because we're going to paint the chassis so that those bars that we've added don't rust. So step by step, little by little, that's what we're working on. Thank you guys so much for joining. I hope you learned something with us. I hope you like what we did. I'm pretty proud of what we did for the brake system. I showed it off on social media before now, so if you haven't done that, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and you're going to kind of get to see behind the scenes, or probably a little bit ahead of the full-length videos here on YouTube. So make sure to do that, because that's important, because, you know, it's fun to do. So make sure to hit that subscribe button as well if you enjoyed this, and if you're ready to see the rest of the stuff that we're going to do to this car. And I hope with everything in me that we can get this thing to the racetrack as soon as possible. So thank you guys so much. See you next week.